Okay, we're ready now to start assembling our lathe back together and reinstalling our spindle shaft. Again, be sure this bearing is on, shaft is clean and dry. We're going to be loading this up in a couple different ways. Again, be sure this thing is not plugged in. There is no power here. Be careful of this sensor. This is your speed sensor indicator, and just be careful around it that you don't get fingerprints on the little electronic eye, and just be sure we're not touching it. Again, let's go ahead and put our lathe back together. We have our keyway. We've oriented it in the shaft, and we're going to keep it at 12 o'clock. We're going to be reinstalling the spindle drive pulley. It will go on with the smaller pulley toward the motor and the larger pulley toward the headstock end of the lathe. We'll put it on inside the hole. Next, we'll be putting on the spindle lock collar. The spindle lock collar does not have a particular orientation. Just line it up with the keyway on the shaft and all will be good to go. So let us put it in and kind of have a look. Start with the shaft, place it in the hole. Take your belt, go ahead and loop it up next to the end so that it'll stay out of the way. Next is your spindle drive pulley. It's going to just put your hand through this hole with it, slide it up on the shaft again. Your keyway is at 12 o'clock. It's going to slide freely on. Next is your spindle locking collar. Put it in place. It is going to slide on to the keyway as well. Now at this point, it's important to do one thing before we start installing the rear bearing, and that is to put the spindle lock collar in place. And we need to do that because we will not be able to get to the Allen wrench set screws once it is all the way back into the housing. We won't be able to get to them very easily. So again, remember, we tighten the Allen screw at the keyway first. So let us go ahead and slide our shaft in completely. Now, on this particular model, the indexing pin is really handy at this point to put now into our spindle and hold it in place for us. We're going to put it in. It does not matter which hole. And now it will hold the spindle from moving, and we can place our spindle locking collar. Simply go in, look at the spindle locking collar and slide it back to where it just does not touch the back of the housing. You want to give it about, I like to give it about 1/8 of an inch, 3/16, something like that. Once it's in location, a fine point Sharpie, not one of the fat guys, but one of the skinny ones. Once it's in place, mark the shaft with a line that goes about at least 1/3 of the way around. Once that is marked and you're satisfied that's within about 1/8 to 3/16 of this back housing, remove your indexing pin. Slide your shaft assembly back out of the headstock. It should slide real easily, not all the way. And now turn it to where the keyway is at the 9 o'clock position. And now with a 4mm Allen wrench, tighten the set screw, being sure your mark that you made with the Sharpie is still in place. You're still lined up. Snug this one down. That's over the keyway. Snug it, rotate it 180 degrees, snug the opposite side down. Do not worry with the spindle drive pulley at this point. Now holding the back of the shaft, slide the piece back in. Once again, our spindle indexing pin becomes our friend. Let us put it in, again, holding our spindle so that it doesn't turn. Now we take our wave washer. This doesn't have a particular way that it goes in. It's wavy, so it don't matter. And our new bearing for the motor end of the headstock. Put the wave washer in first, and then slide the bearing. You may need to lift up on the shaft a little, pulling back on the shaft slightly, begin to work your new bearing in. You can work your new bearing in until you come to be able to see the threads on this end of the shaft. Once you get to those threads, you're going to need a 5mm Allen wrench and your collar. This collar has a particular orientation. One side is going to be milled completely flat. The other side is going to have a raised shoulder. This raised shoulder side is going to go next to the bearing. This will place itself against the shaft side lower bearing race. This is going to be our pre-load collar. This is a very important step in this replacement bearing process. I'm going to use this along with the Allen wrench placed in the Allen socket head that is loose. This will become the lever that I use to gently tighten this. With the spindle indexing pin in the headstock, it'll now hold the headstock so that I can gently turn this in. This threaded will gently push that bearing into position. You should be able to do this by hand, but sometimes since this is an Acme style of thread, it can be pretty coarse and can sometimes be really hard to turn at points. When it becomes hard to turn, you can place this Allen wrench in that socket head and turn it. It'll also fit in the notches on the sides of the collar, and you can continue to turn it. There is a special wrench for this called a spanner, but most people don't have them, so this works just fine. And continue to tighten this down, but go slowly as you tighten it down. You're checking to see that it is beginning to take all of the play out. So be careful. Now's a good time to take out the spindle lock pin and feel of this bearing. Is there any play? Once you've reached the point in this collar that the play has been removed, snugged up by hand, place your spindle locking pin back in, loosen this, loosen it all the way, feel the shaft, be sure there's no binding here. Take your spindle lock pin out, turn your shaft. It should be snug with this collar loose but smooth. Once you've determined that there is no end play back and forth, that's been removed, tighten this collar down again, put your indexing pin back in, tighten this collar until it touches. Once it touches, back it off about 1/8 of a turn. You just want it touching that bearing race without pressure at this point. Just touching the race with no pressure. It's very important. If this step is not taken correctly, your bearings will prematurely fail from being overheated. If you start your lathe up and you know there's excessive heat around these bearings, this is likely the culprit, and it's too tight, creating excessive friction. We take the spindle indexing pin out. We turn this now that we've got it set, and we tighten this Allen screw. And we're ready to reinstall the handle, which is going to need a 3mm. Place it on. You're going to notice a cutaway in the shaft, in the spindle shaft, and that's where your Allen screws will go. Once this is slid up, it will contact that collar. Once it's contacted that collar, you're ready to snug up these two Allen screws, and here it doesn't matter. There's no keyway involved. Just snug them up. Again, like my daddy taught me, if you're gritting your teeth, you're tightening it too tight. So just kind of snug it. Snug it. Take your 5mm Allen wrench again, and just be sure you've got this one snugged. Turn the shaft now. Everything should feel good. Should feel snug. At this time, it's a good idea to be sure you've got your spindle lock in the right place so that it engages correctly. Nothing's hitting, binding, or any other way. Now we want to line up and reinstall our drive pulley, again being sure that we are indexed with the keyway at the 9 o'clock position facing out to the side. It's easier to do this by just slipping the belt on the large pulley and the smaller pulley. Lift your motor. And of course, when you're making a video, the things you do normally that take 3 seconds seem to not want to cooperate. You'll notice the belt is really out of alignment. I'm not so sure that you can see that. Let me zoom us in to get a little better picture of this. Sorry about that. You'll notice that now that pulley and belt is very much out of line. The motor weight is just resting on it, and we can easily push that spindle shaft drive pulley into place. And here's the nice thing. When it's in alignment with the motor, it will stop. The natural tension of the 5 grooves and 6 ribs, once they're lined up, it will no longer move easily. It will want to be in place. Once it's there, just spin it a little bit. Just spin it around a little. It'll work it a little bit, and it will then be perfectly aligned. Turning your keyway out toward you, take your 4mm Allen wrench, snug the one over the keyway, back it up, snug the one that isn't against the keyway. This is aluminum. Again, if you grit your teeth, you tighten it too tight, snug it, snug it, snug it, alternating between the two. Now, you should be in alignment. The shaft is running smoothly, motor weight only, and it's in place. Now, I'm going to plug the lathe up, and we're going to actually operate it with the speed control out of its place. This is where you need to be careful, but this does allow us to be able to see in here and see what's going on. Be sure the stop switch is off, the speed control is down. Now, with just the weight on the motor, go ahead and tighten. And it's at this point I need to point something out. As you are tightening this motor, when you push down on the handle to lock the tensioner in place, please realize that it may loosen the tension or tighten the tension. So when you have the tension where you want it, and typically that's just with the weight of the motor is sufficient, hold the handle while you tighten this one. Lathe is now ready to see how it sounds, and you're with me. We'll see if we fixed it or not. Stop switch is on. The digital readout, of course, will not be correct at this point, as the sensor doesn't see these bolt heads inside here. Very slowly bring the lathe up to speed. Notice if you have anything loose, wobbling, clicking, ticking, and all those things at a low speed. As we turners know, low speed means less accidents, or at least severity. It happens a little slower at least. Then gently raise your speed. Now, it sees the vibration, the noise, the chatter that was all present before. It's gone. We're going to let the lathe run a minute, and you're not going to have to watch the lathe run. We'll load it a little bit. We're going to check. We're just going to feel the housings inside. Be careful doing this to be sure we don't have any heat beginning to build up. We're going to shut the lathe off. We're going to check everything again visually. Pulleys, motors, everything looks good. We're ready to put our speed control back in. Now there's a bit of a trick to this, so I'll try to get this where you can see it. Making sure this wire is laid down. Lay this speed control box and just tilt it in very gently and tilt it back in place. If you tilt it in and tilt it out, no worries. Start all 4 of your bolts. And now with a 3mm Allen wrench, run them up until they touch the cover. Now gently snug them. Again, don't grit your teeth or you'll have them too tight. Gently snug them up. Let's be sure everything still works. Be sure our speed indicator is now working. course, we've got motor fan noise here and kind of could muffle that down, I guess. I think we're good to go. I think it's time to make shavings. What about you? Well, I hope this video has been somewhat informative. I'm not a professional videographer, but as I got ready to do this job on this lathe, I really didn't find good information out there, forum groups, and a lot of discussion. There's still much more that could be said, much more that could be alluded to, but it's simple enough to say that if you're a wood turner, sooner or later, these bearings are going to give out in your lathe. And for about $30 to $50 or maybe less, don't go too cheap. We wood turners sometimes do that. Don't go too cheap. Get a good quality bearing. I won't recommend a bearing type. You can research that for yourself. Educate yourself and go ahead and take it apart. No special tools needed. Very easy repair. Put your lathe back in top shelf condition again. Again, this is Jim at rswoodturning@gmail.com, and thank you for tuning in, and again I hope this has been helpful. Happy turning, be safe. Say it is kind of rough and it's not of top quality, but I hope you find it informative. The Jet 1642 that is in this video is about 7 years old now, and the bearings have went out in the headstock. I bought this lathe second hand, so I don't know if they've been replaced before or not. The teardown and disassembly is straightforward, and you can find that in the owner's manual or online at jettools.com, and those instructions are pretty straightforward. This is not a hard job. It should not be intimidating. You'll notice in the reassembly that I give you some points. We talk a little bit about bearings and bearing types, but of the parts of this video that I think would be most important to see are the preloads of the bearing once the shaft is reinstalled with the new bearings. Please know that this part of this installation determines the smoothness, the run out, as well as the longevity of the bearings you use. Be safe in doing this. Be careful to keep the machine unplugged. Safety is my concern on my end. Safety on your end is your concern. I hope the video helps you in some way, and thank you for watching.